Imagine stepping into a city where the streets are lined with mud brick houses. The air is filled with the sound of merchants calling out their wares, and colossal ziggurats rise like mountains against the horizon. This is ancient Babylon, a place that wasn't just a city, but the beating heart of one of the world's earliest civilizations. People there lived, loved, traded, worshipped, and dreamed in ways that might feel surprisingly familiar, yet deeply different from our world today. In this video, we'll gently guide you through the daily life of a Babylonian city, from the way families shared meals to the bustling marketplaces, the rituals in temples, the work of scribes, and the challenges of living in a society that balanced law, order, and faith. We'll explore what it was like to wake up in a small clay home, to buy food at a busy market, to witness the grandeur of Babylon's religious festivals, and even to see how people tried to rest at night under the star-filled Mesopotamian sky. If you've ever wondered what life was like thousands of years ago, long before our modern comforts, this journey will carry you back in time, painting a picture of both the ordinary and extraordinary moments that defined the world as first great metropolis. And since this channel, History for Sleep, is designed to bring you calming, immersive stories of the past, you can let your imagination wander and relax as the history unfolds. Whether you're listening as you drift off to sleep or simply enjoying a quiet moment, this story is here to ease you into rest. Before we begin, I'd love to invite you to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss future journeys into history. And in the comments below, let me know what time of day you enjoy listening in and what parts of history you'd love to explore next. Your ideas help shape the stories we share. So settle in, get comfortable, and let's step together into the bustling streets of an ancient Babylonian city. The first light of dawn touches the flat rooftops of Babylon, a city that seemed to never fully rest, but instead shifted from the stillness of night into the hum of daily life, with a rhythm as old as the Euphrates itself. The rising sun casts a warm golden hue across the mud brick walls, softening their rough edges and turning the great city into a glowing maze of streets and courtyards. Even before the sun has fully lifted itself above the horizon, life has already begun to stir. Imagine waking in a modest clay brick home, the walls cool from the night air. The rooms are small, with few windows, built to hold in the shade against the relentless Mesopotamian heat. Families sleep on mats or low wooden beds, sometimes on rooftops when the nights are too warm indoors. The faint smell of last night's fire lingers, mingling with the earthiness of baked clay and stored grain. Children stir beside their parents, while household animals shift in corners or small pens. Outside, the city stretches in every direction. Babylon is not just a city, but a living organism, each part dependent on the other, pulsing with the daily routines of tens of thousands of people. As the day begins, the sounds rise gradually. The bray of donkeys and the lowing of cattle echo through narrow streets. Women can be heard sweeping the entryways of their homes, a small ritual of cleanliness and order before the busyness of the day. The rhythmic beat of a potter's tool tapping clay may already carry faintly through the morning air, signaling the early start of craftsmen. The rooftops themselves are alive at dawn. Some families use them as places to cook, to rest, or to store supplies. From these higher vantage points, one can see the city slowly awakening, smoke rising from new fires, merchants rolling out their mats and goods, and priests beginning the first chants of the day in the shadow of the towering ziggurat. The great temple rises above the city like a mountain built by human hands, its terraced levels shimmering in the early light. It is the house of the gods, a constant reminder to the Babylonians that their lives are intertwined with forces far beyond themselves. The Euphrates River, lifeline of the city, mirrors the new sun in rippling bands of gold. Its waters are already busy at this early hour. Fishermen guide their reed boats along its currents, pulling in nets heavy with fish, while water carriers fill their jars to supply households and workshops for the day ahead. Along its banks, farmers may already be at work, tending irrigation channels that keep fields fertile despite the heat. Babylon, though an urban marvel, still depends on the steady rhythm of agriculture. And so the dawn finds laborers outside the city walls, preparing for another day in the fields. Inside the city, dawn is also the time of sacred duties. In temples both large and small, priests and priestesses conduct rituals meant to honor the gods and ensure protection for the people. Incense drifts into the air, and chants echo within sacred courtyards. For many Babylonians, the day does not truly begin until prayers have been offered. A shopkeeper may whisper a small devotion to Shamash, the sun god, asking for honesty and fairness in the marketplace. A mother may place a small offering at a household shrine, invoking Ishtar for protection of her children. Even in their simplest forms, these gestures tie the ordinary routines of daily life to the vast order of the divine. The streets themselves are narrow and winding, paved in places, but often dusty paths between homes and shops. As the morning unfolds, these paths begin to fill with people. Merchants push carts laden with goods. Shepherds drive goats and sheep toward pens within the city walls. Neighbors greet one another with nods and short words of blessing as they pass, and children, ever restless, dart between adults with laughter and shouts. A visitor walking through Babylon at dawn would notice a contrast of calm and preparation. The air is cooler, the pace slower than it will be later in the heat of day. Bakers light their fires, and the aroma of fresh bread begins to drift through alleyways, a scent as timeless and comforting then as it is now. Brewers stir vats of barley and date beer, the most common drink for Babylonians of every class. Craftsmen open shutters to small workshops, where tools are neatly arranged from the night before. Each profession, each family, contributes, a thread to the intricate fabric of life that makes Babylon more than just walls and gates. It makes it a civilization. At the great gates of the city, guards are already posted. These massive structures, decorated with brilliant glazed bricks depicting lions, bulls, and dragons, stand as both defense and symbol. The most famous, the Ishtar Gate, rises in vivid blue, its fierce animal figures gleaming even in early light. Through these gates, caravans enter and leave, carrying goods, ideas, and stories from distant lands. At dawn, traders often arrive, eager to set up before the marketplace becomes crowded. They bring wool, spices, metals, and exotic objects that stir both curiosity and desire in the people of Babylon. But dawn is not only about commerce or ritual, it is about rhythm. For the Babylonians, each day is a repetition of actions deeply tied to survival and tradition. To rise with the sun, to tend to family, to honor the gods, to prepare one's work, these were not choices but necessities, woven into the very identity of the city. Each day reflected both continuity and fragility, a balance between the forces of nature, the demands of labor, and the protection of divine order. Even the sounds of dawn tell a story. The clip-clop of donkey hooves along stone, the murmur of voices bargaining over early goods, the distant chants of priests, and the splash of oars in the Euphrates, all merge into a tapestry of sound that is at once chaotic and harmonious. It is the heartbeat of Babylon itself. As the sun climbs higher, the shadows shorten, and the city becomes fully awake. The coolness of dawn fades, replaced by the promise of heat, noise, and ceaseless motion. Yet for those first moments, when the golden light stretches across walls and temples, there is a sense of peace, a reminder that before the rush of daily tasks, the city too must awaken slowly, steadily, in step with the rhythm of the rising sun. To imagine dawn in Babylon is to imagine a world both ancient and alive, where the ordinary acts of waking, working, and worshiping were as essential to the people then as they are to us now. It is the beginning of a day that may look unfamiliar in its details, but deeply familiar in its essence. After all, we too rise, prepare, and step into the flow of life, just as the Babylonians once did under the same rising sun. When we think of a home today, we might imagine painted walls, furniture in every room, and glass windows letting in light. But in ancient Babylon, a home was something far more modest, practical, and yet deeply meaningful. The Babylonian home was a small world in itself, where family life unfolded, where work and rest overlapped, and where the gods themselves were invited in through tiny shrines tucked into corners. Most homes were made of mud brick, the most common building material in Mesopotamia. Sun-dried bricks, shaped from clay and straw, formed the walls of countless houses across the city. These walls were thick, not just for sturdiness, but also to keep out the heat of the blazing Mesopotamian sun. Inside, rooms were arranged around a central courtyard, a feature common to many homes. This courtyard was open to the sky and served as a space for cooking, socializing, and even sleeping on particularly hot nights. Walking into a typical Babylonian home, you would notice that the floors were often packed earth, sometimes covered with reed mats. Furniture was simple: low stools, wooden chests, clay storage jars, and woven beds. Richer families could afford carved chairs, polished tables, and decorated pottery. But even the simplest home had its share of comfort, arranged not with excess, but with practicality. Light entered the home sparingly. Windows were small, narrow slits high in the walls, designed less to illuminate and more to allow air to circulate. This dimness gave rooms a cool, hushed quality. Oil lamps, made of clay and filled with sesame oil, provided light after sunset. Their flickering flames cast long shadows across walls, making the smallest room feel like a stage for the quiet dramas of family life. Family was the heart of the Babylonian home. A household could include parents, children, and sometimes extended relatives. Servants might also live within wealthier homes, and in some cases, apprentices or laborers tied to a family's business resided there as well. Each person had a role, shaped by age, gender, and tradition. Men often worked outside farming, trading, or practicing crafts, while women oversaw the household. They cooked, spun wool, wove cloth, and raised children. Yet women also had surprising independence. Many managed shops, owned property, or even ran taverns. Children filled these homes with energy. Boys might be apprenticed early to their father's trades, or if fortunate, sent to school to learn writing and arithmetic. Girls often learned domestic skills, though they too could inherit property or conduct business. Play was never absent. Children had dolls, miniature wagons, and little clay animals to keep them entertained in between their small chores. Daily routines in the home were structured around survival and ritual. A day might begin with sweeping the courtyard, then preparing bread from dough made the night before. Clay ovens were often located outside or in the courtyard itself, where flatbreads were baked against the walls of domed ovens, their aroma filling the house. Meals were often simple: bread, onions, dates, and beer brewed from barley. These foods were stored in clay jars and baskets, kept carefully against spoilage in the warm climate. Yet beyond food and chores, the home was also a spiritual place. Most Babylonian houses had small shrines or niches built into the walls. In them, clay figurines of protective spirits or small offerings to gods might be placed. The presence of these shrines reminded families that the divine was not only in towering temples, but also within the walls of everyday life. A household might pray for protection from sickness, good fortune in business, or blessings for children. These small acts of devotion brought comfort, anchoring family life within the vast order of the cosmos. For wealthier families, homes could be multi-storied, with upper levels serving as sleeping areas or storage. Rooftops were particularly valuable. In the cool evenings, they became spaces for rest, conversation, and stargazing. Under the clear Mesopotamian sky, families could gather together, tell stories, and watch the constellations, which the Babylonians studied with a fascination that gave rise to some of the world's first astronomy. Inside the walls of every home, one could also find evidence of Babylon's highly organized society. Contracts and legal tablets often governed domestic matters. Marriages were arranged and recorded on clay tablets. Inheritance, property ownership, and even disputes within households were often matters settled not just by family consensus, but by law. This legal structure ensured stability, but it also revealed how deeply intertwined personal life was with the authority of the state and the gods. Even the smallest details of a home tell us about the values of the Babylonians. Storage jars filled with grain reflected a culture centered on farming and food security. Looms in corners highlighted the importance of weaving, with textiles being both essential and highly prized. Clay tablets tucked away in wealthy homes spoke of education and literacy, while charms and amulets hanging near doorways showed the ever-present fear of illness, spirits, or misfortune. The Babylonian home was not isolated from the city around it. Sounds of neighbors traveled easily through walls. The laughter of children, the calls of merchants, the clanging of blacksmiths, these noises bled into daily life. Courtyards and shared walls created close-knit communities where people knew one another well, and privacy was far more limited than we expect today. Yet this closeness fostered bonds of cooperation and trust. Still, differences in class could be stark. The poorest lived in cramped, single-room dwellings, sometimes on the edges of the city. The wealthiest built sprawling homes with decorated courtyards, tiled walls, and fine furniture. But regardless of wealth, every home was both shelter and sanctuary, the place where life's most personal moments unfolded. Births, marriages, and deaths all occurred within these walls, marking the rhythm of human existence across generations. To imagine life in a Babylonian home is to imagine warmth and closeness, where family members shared not only space, but also responsibility. It is to picture children playing in dusty courtyards, women tending fires with practiced skill, men returning weary from fields or shops, and elders passing down stories by lamplight. It is a world defined by simplicity, necessity, and tradition, yet infused with devotion and meaning. At night, as the city quieted, homes returned to stillness. Mats were spread across rooftops, oil lamps dimmed, and the stars once again became companions. Within these walls, families slept side by side, breathing the same cool air, bound by the same rhythms of daily life. The Babylonian home, though made of mud and clay, was the heart of the city, the place where life began and ended, and where the ancient world felt most familiar to the lives we know today. If we could step quietly into the kitchen courtyard of a Babylonian home at dawn, the first thing we might notice would be the smell of bread. It is one of the oldest scents in history, warm and earthy, filling the air as dough is pressed and baked against the walls of a domed clay oven. For Babylonians, bread was more than just food, was the foundation of daily life, the nourishment on which families depended, and the centerpiece of meals from the humblest hut to the palace of the king. The Babylonians did not have breakfast in the way we think of it today, with coffee and eggs and a clear sense of a morning meal. Instead, food was woven into the rhythms of work and survival, eaten when the day allowed and shaped by what was available. Still, the first meal of the day often consisted of bread, beer, and perhaps a handful of dates. These were the staples, filling, practical, and deeply tied to the land. Bread came in many forms. There were flatbreads baked quickly and eaten warm. There were loaves baked thicker and kept for days. Archaeologists have discovered clay molds used for baking, suggesting that bread could be shaped with care, sometimes decorated or flavored with herbs, seeds, or honey when resources allowed. The simplest bread was made of barley, the most common grain, while wealthier families might eat wheat bread, considered finer and softer. Beer was just as important, though it was not the golden fizzy drink we imagine today. Babylonian beer was thick, almost porridge-like, made from fermented barley bread. It was nutritious, full of calories, and safe to drink when water supplies might be questionable. People of all ages drank it, though children sometimes mixed it with more water to dilute its strength. At breakfast, a jug of beer might be shared among family members, each drinking through reed straws from the same vessel. Dates sweetened the morning. Grown in abundance along the Euphrates, date palms were treasured for their versatility. Dates could be eaten fresh, dried for storage, or pressed into syrups. They provided quick energy, and their sweetness balanced the heavier flavors of bread and beer. A Babylonian child might carry a handful of dates to nibble on while helping with chores, while adults often used them to flavor stews or baked goods. Onions, garlic, and leeks were also common additions to meals, as they grew well in the region and were inexpensive. A simple breakfast might be little more than bread dipped into a stew flavored with onions and herbs, eaten with fingers or with small pieces of flatbread used as scoops. Lentils, chickpeas, and beans provided protein and were often stewed slowly until soft. For most Babylonians, meat was rare and reserved for special occasions or wealthier households. But fish from the Euphrates made its way onto many tables, grilled or dried for preservation. Cooking itself was a communal task, often overseen by women, but carried out with the help of children or servants in larger households. Fires were kept in small clay ovens or open hearths, fueled by reeds, dung, or scraps of wood. Cooking vessels were clay pots, some plain, some decorated, always practical. Meals were flavored with herbs like coriander, cumin, and mustard seed, giving a sense of richness even to simple dishes. Salt, harvested from nearby marshes, was a prized addition, carefully stored and traded. While the first meal was simple, the midday and evening meals carried more weight. By midday, families might eat stews of vegetables, legumes, or grains, served with bread. Wealthier homes could add lamb, goat, or beef, often stewed with onions and garlic until tender. Fish remained a steady source of protein for many. Milk from goats or sheep was consumed fresh or turned into yogurt and cheese, which added variety to the diet. Dinner, eaten after the day's work, was often the largest meal. Families gathered in courtyards or on rooftops, sharing dishes by lamplight. Meals were eaten together, reinforcing bonds of family and community. There were no forks or spoons as we know them today. Instead, food was eaten with fingers or with pieces of bread used as tools. Bowls and plates were made of clay, sturdy and functional. Water, beer, and sometimes wine accompanied meals, though wine was rarer and often imported from the Western lands. For the wealthy, meals could be extravagant. Records from palace kitchens reveal menus of roasted meats, exotic fruits, honeyed pastries, and flavored wines. Banquets for kings and nobles displayed abundance, designed not only to satisfy hunger, but to demonstrate power and prosperity. Musicians, dancers, and entertainers sometimes accompanied these meals, turning dinner into spectacle. For ordinary Babylonians, however, food was never wasteful. It was carefully measured, stored, and consumed with respect for the effort it required. The marketplace played a central role in daily meals. Farmers and merchants brought fresh produce, fish, and dairy into the city, where households purchased what they needed. Women often managed these transactions, choosing ingredients carefully. Bargaining was common, and the exchange of food connected families to the larger rhythm of the city. To walk through the market was to smell roasting fish, fresh herbs, and the sweetness of dates, all mingling with the earthy scent of clay ovens baking bread. Festivals and special occasions transformed meals into celebrations. During the New Year festival, for instance, feasting was an essential part of honoring the gods. Offerings of food were given in temples, while families prepared their finest dishes at home. Meat, fruits, and sweet cakes flavored with honey or dates might be shared in abundance, marking the day as sacred. These feasts were as much about community and devotion as they were about eating. Yet food was also about survival. Grain shortages, drought, or flooding of the rivers could threaten supplies, making every harvest a matter of life and death. For this reason, food storage was central to Babylonian households. Clay jars and granaries held surplus grain, dried dates, and salted fish. Families planned carefully, ensuring they had enough to last through lean seasons. The stability of meals, the comfort of bread and beer each day, was never taken for granted. The rituals of eating also carried spiritual weight. Food was offered to household gods before being eaten. Meals were sometimes accompanied by small prayers of thanks, linking the act of nourishment to divine protection. To eat was not just to satisfy hunger, but to participate in the order of the cosmos, in which the gods provided, and humans were stewards of their gifts. In the quiet of a Babylonian morning, the simple act of sharing bread, dates, and beer was an affirmation of life. Children laughed as they dipped bread into stews. Parents passed jars of beer between them, and families looked toward the work ahead with full stomachs and steady energy. These meals were humble, but they sustained not just bodies, but traditions, families, and communities. To picture breakfast and daily meals in Babylon is to see a rhythm both ancient and familiar. The scent of bread fresh from an oven, the comfort of a shared drink, the chatter of family gathered around food. Though thousands of years separate us, the heart of these meals' nourishment, togetherness, and gratitude remains the same. If the home was the heart of Babylonian family life, then the marketplace was the lifeblood of the city itself. To step into the market of Babylon was to step into a world of sound, scent, and color, a place where the city's energy gathered and spilled into every corner. Here, the humble and the wealthy mingled. Goods from distant lands arrived by caravan or riverboat, and voices in many languages rose together in an endless chorus of barter and exchange. Imagine the sun climbing higher over the city walls, casting its light onto streets that now teem with life. Merchants set up stalls of woven mats or wooden stands, spreading out their wares for all to see. Farmers who had walked in from the countryside display baskets of onions, beans, and cucumbers. Shepherds lead goats and sheep to be sold for meat or milk. Fishermen, their catches fresh from the Euphrates, call out their prices, holding up glistening fish that still smell of the river. The air is alive with competing scents. The sweetness of dates stacked in tall pyramids, the sharp tang of garlic and onions, the rich aroma of roasting meat, the earthy smell of clay pots and baskets. Nearby, brewers ladle thick beer into jars for customers to carry home, while bakers pull hot bread from domed clay ovens, their stalls surrounded by hungry buyers eager for a warm meal. Noise fills the marketplace as surely as smell. The bray of donkeys mixes with the low voices of merchants, the shouts of bargaining, and the chatter of children darting through crowds. A buyer inspects a piece of cloth, running fingers across its texture, then argues for a better price. Another examines a jar of honey, tilting it to see its golden sheen. Every purchase is not just an exchange of goods, but of words, gestures, and ritualized negotiation. To bargain is expected, a sign of respect between seller and buyer, a dance of persuasion and pride. Beyond food, the marketplace is full of crafts and tools. Potters display clay bowls, jars, and oil lamps, each one slightly different, shaped by hand and wheel. Metalworkers show bronze knives, copper jewelry, and small tools that glint in the sun. Weavers hang lengths of wool cloth dyed in earthy tones, while beadmakers string bright stones into necklaces. These goods speak of Babylon's skilled artisans, whose work was valued not only within the city, but far beyond its walls. The market is also a place of animals. Donkeys stand tethered, their ears flicking as they wait for new owners. Goats bleat impatiently, chickens cluck in woven cages, and sheep shuffle in tight groups. Animals are sold for food, milk, wool, and labor, essential to the survival of families. Even dogs appear in the marketplace, some trained to guard, others simply following their masters through the crowds. Babylon's marketplace was more than local, it was global for its time. Caravans from distant lands brought exotic goods, lapis lazuli from Afghanistan, tin from Anatolia, cedar wood from Lebanon, and spices from as far as India. Traders arriving by boat along the Euphrates brought baskets of dates, jars of wine, and fine textiles. To walk through the market was to encounter the entire known world in miniature, each stall a piece of a larger web of trade that connected Babylon to empires far away. This cosmopolitan energy meant that the marketplace was also a place of languages. While Akkadian was the primary tongue of Babylonians, Aramaic, Sumerian, and even Egyptian or Hittite might be heard among traders. Buyers sometimes relied on gestures when words failed, pointing, nodding, and using numbers carved on tablets or etched into clay receipts. These little exchanges remind us that Babylon was not an isolated city, but a hub where cultures met and mingled. Law and order were ever present in the market. Babylonian law, especially the famous Code of Hammurabi, regulated trade with precision. Prices of goods were sometimes set, weights and measures standardized, and dishonest merchants harshly punished. Clay tablets found by archaeologists reveal receipts, contracts, and records of sales, evidence of a highly organized system that ensured fairness. Merchants carried standardized weights, small carved stones, or metal lumps to prove their honesty when measuring grain, silver, or oil. The presence of scribes also shaped the marketplace. These educated men sat with clay tablets, recording sales, drafting contracts, or noting debts. If a family bought a plot of land or arranged a large purchase of grain, it was often inscribed permanently onto clay, baked in the sun, and stored as proof. These scribes gave the market a sense of permanence and trust, a written memory of its daily life. For ordinary Babylonians, visiting the market was more than shopping, it was social. Neighbors met and exchanged gossip. Families brought children along to taste treats or watch street performers, and travelers brought stories from afar. The marketplace buzzed not only with commerce, but with conversation. A woman might linger to ask about the health of a friend's family. A farmer might pause to hear news from traders about distant wars or famines. In a city as large as Babylon, the market was where people came together, where the threads of community were most tightly woven. The marketplace was also a stage for entertainment. Musicians played flutes, lyres, and drums to attract crowds, while acrobats or storytellers gathered groups to earn a few coins. Performers told myths of Gilgamesh or sang hymns to the gods, blending entertainment with devotion. For children, the market could be as exciting as any festival, full of wonders to see and hear. Yet amid the liveliness, the market also reflected Babylon's inequalities. The wealthy could purchase fine jewelry, imported spices, and soft wool cloaks dyed in bright colors. The poor might only afford coarse bread, onions, or small amounts of beer. Some families came to sell rather than buy, offering surplus goods or labor in exchange for basic necessities. The market revealed both the abundance of the city and the struggles of its people, each transaction a mirror of status and survival. Even the gods were present in the market. Small shrines or offerings were sometimes placed near stalls, asking for good fortune in trade. Priests occasionally moved through the crowds, ensuring offerings to temples were not neglected. Some merchants dedicated a portion of their earnings to the gods, believing that divine favor was essential for success. The marketplace was, in its way, another extension of Babylon's spiritual life, where buying and selling were intertwined with faith. As the sun reached its height, the market swelled to its busiest. Crowds pressed closer, voices grew louder, and the air grew thick with heat and scent. Children tugged at parents' hands for sweet cakes, merchants shouted to draw attention, and scribes bent low over their clay tablets. By afternoon, some stalls began to close, goods sold or packed away, while others lingered into the evening, lit by the glow of oil lamps. To imagine the Babylonian marketplace is to imagine a city alive in every sense, its economy, its culture, its faith, and its humanity all on display in one crowded, noisy, endlessly fascinating space. For the people of Babylon, the marketplace was not just where they bought food or tools. It was where they felt the pulse of their city, where they saw its wealth and its diversity, where they met neighbors and strangers, and where the story of Babylon unfolded every single day. In a city as grand as Babylon, where temples reached toward the heavens and markets overflowed with goods from distant lands, daily life was also expressed through the fabric and ornaments people wore. Clothing was not only practical, but symbolic. It told the story of who you were, your class, your wealth, your role in society, and even your devotion to the gods. To walk through the streets of Babylon was to see a living tapestry of wool, linen, beads, and jewels, woven together into a reflection of the city's identity. Most Babylonian garments were simple in form, but rich in meaning. The most common material was wool, sheared from the flocks of sheep that grazed the fertile plains surrounding the city. Wool was spun, dyed, and woven into cloth by skilled hands, often within households, but also in workshops where weaving was an important trade. Linen, made from flax, was rarer and considered more luxurious, prized for its smooth texture and lighter weight. Those who could afford linen displayed it proudly, while the majority made do with wool, practical and abundant. The basic clothing for men was a simple tunic, belted at the waist. Some tunics were short, reaching to the knees, while others extended to the ankles, depending on the season or the wearer's status. Over these, cloaks or shawls might be draped, especially in cooler months or for ceremonial occasions. Women wore longer dresses, often with wide sleeves, tied with sashes or belts. These garments were not highly tailored by modern standards. Instead, they were draped and folded, creating shapes that were both practical and graceful. Decoration, however, was everywhere. Even simple wool tunics could be adorned with fringes, tassels, or embroidery. Wealthier Babylonians dyed their garments in colors extracted from plants and minerals: deep reds, yellows, blues, and purples. To see someone walking in richly dyed cloth was to know instantly that they held wealth or status. For most, however, natural shades of cream, brown, and gray remained the standard, the colors of undyed wool. Clothing also revealed class distinctions. Laborers, farmers, and common citizens wore short tunics, plain and functional, leaving arms and legs free for work. Their garments were often coarse, worn thin by daily toil. Merchants and officials wore longer robes, softer in texture, signaling their higher place in society. Priests, who held both spiritual and political power, often wore elaborate garments, decorated with symbols of the gods they served. Kings, of course, displayed the most opulence: garments of fine linen, richly dyed, adorned with embroidery and jewels, meant to project majesty and divine favor. Jewelry was central to Babylonian appearance, worn by men and women alike. Gold, silver, and bronze were crafted into necklaces, bracelets, rings, and earrings. Beads of lapis lazuli, carnelian, and turquoise stones, brought by long trade routes, were strung into intricate designs. Even the poorest often wore simple beads of clay or shell, charms thought to protect against illness or evil spirits. Wealthier citizens displayed more elaborate jewelry, not only as decoration, but as investments of wealth, easily carried or traded. Cosmetics also played a role in daily life. Men and women used oils to soften skin dried by the sun and dust. Perfumes made from cedarwood, myrrh, and other fragrant plants were highly prized, masking the odors of daily labor and signaling refinement. Women often lined their eyes with kohl, a dark powder made from minerals, both for beauty and to reduce glare from the bright sun. Rouge, made from crushed stones or plants, added color to cheeks and lips. These practices, though thousands of years old, remind us that the desire to enhance appearance is timeless. Hairstyles varied, but were never neglected. Men commonly wore their hair short, with carefully groomed beards. A thick, well-kept beard was a sign of masculinity and honor, often curled or shaped with oil and tools. Women wore their hair longer, braided or arranged with pins and ribbons. Wigs, though less common than in Egypt, were also used, especially by the wealthy for ceremonies or feasts. Children's hair was often cropped short, though mothers sometimes decorated it with small beads or charms for protection. Footwear was simple but essential. Sandals made of leather or reeds were worn by those who could afford them, while many of the poorer citizens went barefoot, especially in the heat of summer. Sandals were practical, designed to protect feet from hot ground and sharp stones, though in wealthier homes they could be decorated with dyed leather or intricate straps. Special occasions called for special attire. During religious festivals, citizens might wear their finest garments, freshly washed, perfumed with oils, and adorned with jewelry. Weddings, too, were times when families displayed their wealth in clothing and decoration. Priests dressed in ceremonial robes embroidered with sacred symbols, while musicians and dancers at feasts wore colorful garments meant to dazzle and delight. Even in death, clothing played a role. Burials often included garments, jewelry, and personal items intended to accompany the deceased into the afterlife. These items reflected not only wealth, but also the deep belief that clothing and appearance were tied to identity beyond the living world. What makes Babylonian clothing so fascinating is not just its variety, but its echoes of humanity across time. To wear a finely woven dress, to adjust a belt before stepping into the market, to adorn oneself with a necklace for confidence, these are actions that feel familiar even now. Clothing has always been more than covering. It is an expression of identity, a statement of belonging, and a reflection of both personal taste and cultural tradition. In the streets of Babylon, clothing and appearance transformed the city into a living gallery. One could see the contrast between a farmer in his coarse wool tunic, sweat-stained and dusty, and a noble in a flowing robe, fragrant with perfume, rings glittering in the sun. Children darted past in simple cloth, their hair tied with small beads, while merchants displayed fine shawls dyed with brilliant colors to entice buyers. Together, they created a vision of society expressed not in words, but in fabric, form, and ornament. To imagine clothing in Babylon is to imagine texture, the roughness of wool, the smoothness of linen, the coolness of stone beads against skin. It is to picture colors, from muted earth tones to the vibrant reds and blues of luxury dyes. It is to smell the perfumes of oils, to see the gleam of gold in the sun, to hear the faint jingle of bracelets as people moved through crowded streets. The Babylonian desire for beauty and expression, seen in their clothing and appearance, reminds us that even in a world of mud brick houses and clay tablets, people sought to present themselves with dignity, pride, and individuality. In their garments and jewelry, in their beards and perfumes, they revealed not only who they were, but also who they aspired to be. And so, in the daily life of Babylon, clothing was never merely cloth. It was culture, status, identity, and faith, all woven together into the garments that dressed a civilization. In a city as vast and thriving as Babylon, every day was shaped by work. From sunrise to sunset, the lives of its people revolved around labor, duty, and skill. Whether one was a humble farmer, a skilled artisan, a learned scribe, or a priest serving the gods, each role contributed to the strength of the city. Work was not just survival, it was identity, tradition, and often destiny, for professions were usually passed down from parent to child. To begin with, farming remained the backbone of Babylonian society, even within the walls of the great city. Though Babylon is remembered for its monuments and temples, it was agriculture that sustained it all. Farmers rose early, tending the fields beyond the city gates. They relied on the mighty rivers, the Euphrates and the Tigris, whose waters were diverted into irrigation canals. With careful management, these canals transformed the dry landscape into fertile land where barley, wheat, dates, and vegetables could thrive. The work was grueling. Farmers bent under the hot sun, digging, sowing, and harvesting, often with the help of oxen or donkeys. Yet their labor fed the city, and the harvest determined the rhythm of life for all. Shepherds also played their part, guiding flocks of sheep and goats across pastures. Wool from sheep was one of the city's most important resources, spun into thread and woven into cloth. Goats provided milk, meat, and hides. To be a shepherd meant long hours outside the city walls, but it also meant freedom, a life lived with animals and open land. Songs and prayers were often sung to pass the time, echoing across fields where the wind carried the bleats of flocks. Inside the city, craftsmen and artisans filled the streets with their work. Potters spun clay on their wheels, shaping bowls, jars, and lamps that every household needed. The sound of clay being slapped, molded, and hardened in kilns was a daily rhythm in Babylon. Metalworkers smelted bronze and copper, hammering them into tools, weapons, and ornaments. Their forges glowed with fire, and the ring of hammers on anvils could be heard far beyond their workshops. Weavers and spinners worked with wool, creating textiles both plain and ornate. Some fabrics were dyed with natural colors, while others were embroidered with intricate designs. Cloth was more than clothing. It was trade, wealth, and often a family's most valuable possession. Carpenters built furniture, doors, and wooden beams for homes, while brickmakers shaped the very foundation of the city, producing the mud bricks that made up walls, houses, and temples. Among the most respected professions was that of the scribe. Literacy was rare, and those who mastered the art of cuneiform writing held great prestige. Scribes spent long hours pressing wedge-shaped marks into clay tablets with reed styluses. They recorded everything: laws, trade agreements, prayers, stories, astronomical observations. To be a scribe was not only to serve the city, but to preserve its memory. Schools trained young boys, often from well-off families, in the difficult art of reading and writing. Their days were filled with copying signs again and again, learning to keep records that would shape the business, law, and culture of Babylon. Priests formed another influential group. They served in the great temples, conducting rituals, maintaining shrines, and interpreting the will of the gods. Their work was not physical in the same way as farming or craftsmanship, but it was considered vital for the protection and prosperity of the city. Priests oversaw offerings, led festivals, and sometimes even advised kings. They were keepers of sacred knowledge, including medicine, astronomy, and divination. To be a priest was to stand between the people and the gods, carrying a responsibility that shaped every aspect of life. Merchants were equally important in Babylon's bustling economy. The city was a hub of trade, and merchants carried goods across vast distances. Some traveled with caravans loaded with textiles, metals, and spices, while others conducted business along the Euphrates by boat. Within the city, shopkeepers sold food, drink, and tools in the busy markets. Trade was more than livelihood, it was opportunity. Merchants brought wealth to Babylon and connected it to lands far beyond Mesopotamia. For many women, work was tied to the household, but this did not mean they were confined. Women brewed beer, baked bread, spun wool, and managed household affairs. Some ran shops, managed taverns, or worked as midwives and healers. In certain cases, women even became priestesses, holding respected positions within temples. Though men dominated public life, women contributed significantly to both economy and culture. There were also those whose work was tied to labor rather than craft or trade. Builders hauled bricks and stones, raising the walls, temples, and palaces that made Babylon magnificent. Porters carried heavy loads across the marketplace. Servants tended to households, cooking, cleaning, and caring for children. These jobs were often hard and poorly paid, yet they were essential to the functioning of the city. Slavery, too, existed in Babylon, as in most ancient civilizations. Slaves worked in households, on farms, or in workshops. Some were prisoners of war. Others were people who had fallen into debt and sold themselves or their families into servitude. While some could eventually buy their freedom, many remained bound to their masters for life. Their work, though often unrecorded in the grand histories, formed an unseen part of Babylon's strength. Law and order extended even into work. Hammurabi's code and later legal traditions regulated wages, contracts, and responsibilities. A craftsman who performed poor work could be punished, just as a merchant who cheated a buyer might face legal consequences. These laws ensured fairness, though they also reinforced hierarchies, making clear distinctions between free citizens, servants, and slaves. What is striking about professions in Babylon is the sense of continuity. Families often passed their work down through generations. A potter's son became a potter. A scribe's son studied to be a scribe. Skills were taught through apprenticeship, with children learning from parents or masters in workshops. Work was not only about survival, but about belonging, identity, and tradition. And yet, despite the divisions of class and labor, each profession carried dignity. The farmer in his field, the weaver at her loom, the scribe with his stylus, the priest before the altar, all were threads in the fabric of Babylon. Without one, the city could not stand. Together, they created a rhythm of life that carried on day after day, year after year, sustaining a civilization that still echoes in memory thousands of years later. To picture work in Babylon is to picture movement and sound. The creak of wheels as carts carry grain into the city, the steady tapping of a potter shaping clay, the murmur of a scribe reading a contract aloud, the chanting of priests before dawn. Each sound, each gesture, was a reminder that life in Babylon was built not only on grand monuments and powerful kings, but on the work of ordinary men and women. And in this steady labor, we find the humanity of the Babylonians. They rose each morning, worked with their hands and minds, sought fair wages, taught their children skills, and honored their gods through the fruits of their effort. Work was never easy, but it was life. And in the rhythm of that life, Babylon endured, shining as one of the greatest cities the world had ever known. In the bustling city of Babylon, where ziggurats towered toward the heavens and marketplaces echoed with the voices of merchants, children were never far from sight. Their laughter drifted through narrow alleyways, their games filled dusty courtyards, and their small hands learned the same skills their parents practiced before them. Childhood in ancient Babylon was a time of learning, play, and preparation for the roles that awaited each young life. A Babylonian child's world began within the home. Families were close-knit, and children grew up surrounded by parents, siblings, and often extended relatives. Infants were swaddled and cared for by mothers and older siblings, watched carefully against illness or misfortune. Amulets shaped like protective spirits were often tied around babies' necks or placed in cradles, for Babylonians believed that unseen forces could bring sickness. These charms, small though they were, symbolized a family's love and hope for their children's safety. As children grew, they quickly became part of daily routines. Little ones followed their mothers to the market, helped sweep courtyards, or carried small bundles of firewood. Boys and girls alike fetched water, tended to animals, or helped knead dough for bread. Work was part of learning, and every task prepared children for the lives they would one day lead. Yet despite responsibilities, there was room for joy. Clay dolls, carved animals, miniature wagons, and rattles have been found in archaeological sites, evidence that children played as eagerly then as they do now. Games were woven into daily life. Children played with knuckle bones, small animal bones tossed like dice, turning them into contests of chance and skill. They rolled hoops, raced through narrow streets, and likely sang rhymes or clapping songs now lost to history. Older children, especially boys, sometimes imitated the work of adults, pretending to herd small animals or shape clay, preparing for the day when play would give way to duty. Education, however, was the great dividing line in Babylonian childhood. For most children, learning came informally at home, girls absorbing domestic skills, boys practicing farming or trades. But for a select few, usually boys from wealthy families, education meant something more formal, the scribal schools. These schools, often connected to temples, were the training grounds for future scribes, a profession of immense respect and responsibility. The path to becoming a scribe was not easy. Children entered school at a young age, sometimes as early as 6 or 7, and their days were long and demanding. They learned to read and write cuneiform, the wedge-shaped script pressed into clay tablets. To master this system, which contained hundreds of characters, required years of practice and patience. Students spent hours copying signs again and again, their reed styluses pressing carefully into soft clay. Mistakes were met with correction, sometimes stern, for accuracy was essential. Beyond writing, scribal students learned mathematics, counting, multiplication, division, and geometry. These skills were vital for record-keeping, trade, and the construction of canals, temples, and walls. They studied lists of words, proverbs, and even ancient literature, including myths and epics passed down for generations. In this way, education connected them not only to practical tasks, but to the cultural memory of Mesopotamia itself. The life of a student was disciplined. Lessons were long, and teachers demanded respect. Some texts even described teachers using sticks to enforce obedience, reminding us that school was often strict and rigorous. Yet for those who succeeded, the rewards were great. Scribes became the keepers of law, commerce, and knowledge. They recorded contracts, copied religious hymns, tracked the stars, and advised kings. For a child in Babylon, education was the doorway to influence and prestige, though only a few were granted the key. Girls, by contrast, rarely attended formal schools, but their education was no less important. They learned skills from mothers and older women, spinning, weaving, cooking, managing households, and caring for younger siblings. Some girls, particularly in wealthy or priestly families, did receive advanced training, sometimes even becoming literate or serving as priestesses. A few historical records mention women involved in trade or medicine, suggesting that opportunities, while limited, were not entirely absent. Religion also shaped a child's upbringing. From a young age, children learned prayers, hymns, and rituals. They accompanied their parents to temples, watched festivals, and absorbed the rhythms of devotion. Household shrines provided daily reminders of the God's presence, teaching children that their lives were part of a larger divine order. Festivals especially captivated young eyes. Parades, music, feasts, and the grandeur of temple rituals left impressions that shaped their understanding of the world. As children grew older, their paths became more defined. Boys apprenticed to their fathers or masters, learning trades such as pottery, metalwork, or farming. They worked alongside adults, slowly gaining skill until they were ready to take on full responsibilities. Girls moved closer to marriage, sometimes betrothed at a young age, and prepared for the duties of wives and mothers. Yet within these expectations, childhood was still a season of growth, laughter, and curiosity, filled with small freedoms before the weight of adult life set in. Babylonian law reflected the value placed on children, though it was often strict. Hammurabi's code includes rules about inheritance, adoption, and parental authority. Parents could arrange marriages, adopt heirs, or even disown children under certain circumstances. At the same time, laws protected children from neglect, ensuring that obligations of care were not abandoned. These laws reveal how deeply intertwined family life was with the order of society. To picture childhood in Babylon is to imagine a blend of work and wonder. A boy carrying water jars through crowded streets, stopping to play with a hoop before hurrying home. A girl watching her mother weave cloth, her small fingers eager to try the loom. Students hunched over clay tablets in the dim light of a schoolroom, copying signs with tired but determined hands. And in the evenings, families gathered in courtyards, children listening wide-eyed to stories of gods, heroes, and kings, their imaginations stirred by tales as old as the rivers themselves. What stands out most is the continuity across time. Though their games, lessons, and duties were shaped by a world of clay tablets and ziggurats, Babylonian children laughed, learned, and dreamed much as children do today. They were shaped by love, discipline, curiosity, and tradition. Their lives remind us that even in the midst of one of history's greatest cities, childhood was still a time of play and promise, full of small joys and great expectations. And so, in Babylon, the education of children, whether through school, apprenticeship, or family life, ensured that each new generation carried forward the knowledge, skills, and traditions that sustained the city. Through their laughter in the streets, their games in courtyards, and their lessons scratched into clay, they were not only the future of their families, but of Babylon itself. In Babylon, religion was not simply a part of life, it was the very foundation on which life rested. To be a Babylonian was to live in a world where the gods were everywhere, in the sun that rose each morning, in the rivers that brought fertility and destruction, in the stars that gleamed above the rooftops at night. Every stone, every crop, every birth, and every breath was believed to be under divine watch. And at the center of this sacred relationship between mortals and gods stood the temples, magnificent structures that dominated the city's skyline and anchored its soul. The most striking of these temples was the ziggurat, a stepped tower that rose high above the city like a man-made mountain. The most famous of all, Etemenanki, the great ziggurat dedicated to Marduk, Babylon's chief god, was said to reach the heavens themselves. Its name meant a foundation of heaven and earth, and it embodied the belief that Babylon was not just a city, but the very meeting place between the human and divine. To gaze upon it at dawn or dusk was to be reminded that the gods were near, their presence woven into the fabric of daily life. Yet religion in Babylon was not only about grand temples. It was also about the small shrines tucked into homes, where families placed offerings to protective spirits and household gods. Clay figurines of deities stood in niches, their silent faces watching over children, guarding doorways, and blessing food. These home rituals connected ordinary people to the cosmic order, ensuring that even the humblest family lived under divine care. The pantheon of Babylonian gods was vast and complex. At its head was Marduk, the city's patron deity, who rose to prominence as Babylon itself grew powerful. Marduk was seen as the great organizer of the universe, the one who brought order out of chaos, who defeated the primeval sea goddess Tiamat in myth and established the world. His temple, Esagila, was one of the holiest places in the city, a sprawling complex where priests served day and night to honor him. Alongside Marduk were other great deities: Ishtar, the goddess of love, war, and fertility, fierce and radiant, worshipped in lavish ceremonies. Shamash, the sun god, was honored as the bringer of justice, shining light on truth and fairness. Ea, the god of wisdom and water, guided humanity with knowledge. Sin, the moon god, watched over the night, while Nabu, god of writing and wisdom, became the patron of scribes. Together, these gods formed a divine family, each with temples, rituals, and loyal followers. Daily worship was essential. Priests tended to the gods with offerings of bread, beer, incense, and animals. Statues of deities were bathed, clothed, and adorned as if they were living beings, for Babylonians believed the gods truly inhabited their images. Each morning, Rituals began anew. Fires were lit, hymns were sung, and prayers recited. The priest's duty was not symbolic. It was believed to keep the very balance of the universe intact. If the gods were neglected, famine, disease, or disaster could follow. For ordinary Babylonians, participation in religion was woven into life's rhythms. Before meals, families might offer a morsel of food or pour a libation of beer to the household gods. Farmers prayed before planting or harvesting, asking divine blessing for their fields. Merchants offered thanks for safe journeys or protection from dishonesty in trade. Births, marriages, and even illnesses were marked with rituals that tied personal events to divine oversight. Festivals brought religion to its most vibrant expression. The most important was the Akichu, the New Year festival, celebrated in spring. Over several days, the city transformed into a stage of processions, prayers, and feasts. Statues of gods were carried through streets, music and chanting filled the air, and the king himself participated in rituals that reaffirmed his authority as chosen by Marduk. For Babylonians, these festivals were moments when the distance between gods and mortals seemed to vanish, when the divine presence filled every corner of the city. The temples themselves were not just religious centers, but also hubs of economy and learning. They owned land, collected offerings, and stored wealth. Priests acted as administrators, overseeing granaries, lending resources, and even recording transactions. Some temples housed libraries of clay tablets, preserving hymns, medical texts, and astronomical observations. In this way, the temples were both sacred and practical, guardians of the soul and stewards of society. Divination was another important aspect of Babylonian religion. Priests, known as diviners, sought to understand the god's will through signs and omens. They studied the stars, believing celestial movements revealed divine plans. They examined the livers of sacrificed animals, interpreting markings as messages from the gods. Even the flight of birds or unusual weather could be read as a sign. For Babylonians, the future was never random. It was always written, waiting to be revealed through careful observation. Healing, too, was bound to religion. Illness was often believed to be caused by demons or divine displeasure. Priests and healers used a mix of remedies, herbs, poultices, and incantations chanted in sacred words. To be healed was not only to be cured physically, but to be restored spiritually, reconciled with the gods who governed health and misfortune alike. Religion also shaped morality. Hammurabi's code, inscribed centuries earlier, declared that justice was rooted in divine authority. Shamash, the sun god, symbolized fairness, and laws were seen as extensions of divine will. To live ethically was not simply to obey human rulers, but to honor the gods themselves. And yet, religion was not only awe-inspiring, but deeply human. Parents taught children simple prayers. Priests guided worshippers in rituals, and neighbors gathered at small shrines to honor shared deities. Faith was part of daily conversation, woven into greetings, blessings, and farewells. To live in Babylon was to live with the gods always near, their names and stories never far from one's lips. At night, as the city quieted and oil lamps flickered in homes, the temples remained vigilant. Priests tended fires, recited prayers, and watched the heavens. The ziggurat loomed against the star-filled sky, its dark silhouette a reminder that the gods watched, even as the city slept. For Babylonians, there was comfort in this constancy, the knowledge that their lives, fragile and fleeting, were part of a cosmic order sustained by devotion. To walk through Babylon was to walk in a city where every stone and street bore the imprint of the divine. From the smallest household shrine to the towering ziggurat, religion infused daily life with meaning, binding people together in shared rituals, beliefs, and hopes. The temples were more than buildings. They were bridges between heaven and earth, places where humans reached upward and gods leaned downward. And so, in Babylon, religion was not an aspect of life. It was life itself, the heartbeat of the city, the song of its people, and the bond that tied mortal hands to immortal power. In Babylon, where the gods were believed to shape every detail of human life, festivals were far more than holidays. They were moments when the city came alive with joy, ritual, and music, when the everyday rhythm of work and trade gave way to a celebration of the divine. These gatherings carried deep meaning, binding people together as families, neighbors, and citizens, while reminding all that the gods were ever present in their lives. The greatest and most famous of all Babylonian festivals was the Akitu, the New Year festival. Celebrated each spring at the time of sowing, it lasted for days and marked both the renewal of life and the reaffirmation of cosmic order. For Babylonians, the New Year was not just about turning a calendar page. It was about restoring balance between heaven and earth, ensuring the favor of the gods for the year ahead. In preparation for Akitu, temples were cleaned, streets were decorated, and offerings were gathered. The city itself became a sacred stage. Statues of the gods, normally housed deep within temple sanctuaries, were brought out and paraded through the streets. Imagine the awe of the crowds as the gilded statue of Marduk, Babylon's chief god, was carried high, surrounded by priests in ceremonial garments, while the people sang hymns and scattered flowers along the route. To see the gods move through the city was to feel their presence directly, to believe they walked among the people. The king played a central role in the Akitu festival. Each year, he underwent rituals that symbolically humbled him before the gods. At one point, the king would be stripped of his regalia and brought before the statue of Marduk. A priest would slap his face, and the king was expected to shed tears, a sign of humility and devotion. Only then was he restored to his throne, symbolizing his divine right to rule for another year. This act reminded all that even kings were servants of the gods, their authority bound to heavenly approval. The festival was not only solemn but joyous. The streets filled with music from lyres, drums, and flutes. Dancers performed, storytellers recited myths, and families gathered for feasts. Beer flowed freely. Bread and roasted meats were shared, and children watched wide-eyed as processions of priests, singers, and even animals moved through the city. For ordinary Babylonians, Akitu was as much about community as it was about religion, a rare time when the barriers of class seemed to soften, and all joined in celebration. Other festivals punctuated the Babylonian year, each honoring specific gods or marking important moments in the agricultural cycle. Seasonal changes were tied to divine power, and festivals ensured that sowing, harvest, and the turning of seasons were blessed by heavenly forces. For example, Ishtar, the goddess of love and fertility, was honored in celebrations filled with music, dancing, and offerings of flowers and incense. These festivals often blended solemn rituals with exuberant displays of joy, reflecting the dual nature of the goddess herself, tender and fierce, nurturing and warlike. The moon god, Sin, was also honored in nighttime rituals, where priests watched the sky and sang hymns under the stars. Shamash, the sun god, was celebrated at dawn, with prayers for justice and light to guide the people. Each god had their time, and each festival reinforced the belief that the city lived in harmony with the cycles of the cosmos. Festivals were also times of theater and storytelling. Myths such as the Epic of Creation, the tale of Marduk defeating the chaotic goddess Tiamat, were retold in public ceremonies. Priests and performers acted out these myths, sometimes through chants, sometimes through symbolic rituals. To hear these stories aloud, surrounded by neighbors and family, was to experience them not as distant tales, but as living truths. Children would listen with wide eyes, while elders nodded in recognition of traditions passed down through generations. Markets during festivals became even livelier than usual. Merchants sold sweet cakes flavored with honey and dates, special perfumes, and brightly dyed fabrics. Families saved for weeks to purchase treats or gifts during festival days. seeing them as opportunities to indulge beyond the necessities of daily life. The sounds of bargaining and laughter mingled with music, creating a tapestry of joy. Even beyond the city walls, festivals reached into the countryside. Farmers brought offerings of grain, fruit, and animals to temples, tying their labor to the gods' favor. Shepherds offered lambs or goats, fishermen brought their catches, and craftsmen presented the work of their hands. These offerings reminded all that their livelihoods were gifts of divine providence, sustained by the gods' blessing. What is striking is how festivals blurred the line between sacred and social. They were acts of devotion, but they were also moments of rest and renewal. After months of labor in fields or workshops, a festival offered music, food, and companionship. For children, they were magical days of color and excitement. For the elderly, they were reminders of continuity, of traditions stretching back to ancestors long gone. At night, when festival fires burned and music echoed into the sky, Babylon seemed transformed. Oil lamps lit the streets, dancers moved in circles, and voices rose in song. The city, usually so busy with work and trade, became a place of celebration and unity. The gods, it was believed, looked down with favor when their people gathered in joy. Even small, household-level celebrations echoed this spirit. Birthdays, marriages, or personal milestones were marked with feasts, offerings, and prayers. Neighbors were invited, families shared what they could, and the bonds of community were strengthened. In a world where hardship was common, floods, droughts, and illness always near the chance to celebrate was not taken lightly. Festivals were a way of affirming life, of saying that joy, too, was sacred. To imagine festivals in Babylon is to imagine movement, color, and sound. Golden statues gleaming in sunlight, priests in white robes chanting hymns, drums beating rhythms that echoed in the chest. It is to smell incense curling upward in sweet smoke, roasted lamb sizzling over open fires, and freshly baked bread passed among friends. It is to see children running in circles, their laughter blending with music, while elders tell stories of past festivals, ensuring that memory flowed into the present. Festivals were the heartbeat of Babylon, moments when the city's people stepped out of their daily routines and joined together in celebration of gods, seasons, and life itself. They were a reminder that even in a world of toil and uncertainty, there was beauty, joy, and connection. And in the glow of festival fires, under the stars that Babylonians studied with such reverence, the people of the city found not only divine presence, but human belonging. In a city as large and complex as Babylon, where thousands of people lived, traded, and worshipped side by side, order was essential. The narrow streets bustled with merchants, farmers, craftsmen, and travelers, each with their own needs and disputes. Without rules, such a place could easily dissolve into chaos. But the Babylonians believed that law was not merely a human invention. It was a gift from the gods, a sacred framework that held society together. The most famous expression of Babylonian justice is the Code of Hammurabi, one of the oldest written legal codes in the world. Inscribed on tall stone steles for all to see, the code was said to be handed down under the watchful eye of Shamash, the sun god and patron of justice. At its heart was the idea that fairness, order, and accountability were divine principles, meant to protect both the strong and the weak. The code contained hundreds of laws, each covering different aspects of life. It addressed trade, property, marriage, inheritance, debts, and even the duties of workers. Some laws set prices for goods and wages for laborers, ensuring stability in the marketplace. Others dictated how disputes should be settled if a man accused another of theft, if a builder constructed a house that later collapsed, or if neighbors quarreled over property boundaries. Each situation had its rules, carved in stone for all to know. One of the most striking features of Hammurabi's code is its sense of proportion. Many know it for the principle of an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. If someone injured another, they might suffer the same injury in return. To modern ears, this may sound harsh, but in its time, it was seen as a form of fairness punishment limited to the harm done, not left to uncontrolled revenge. The goal was balance, restoring order rather than unleashing endless cycles of conflict. Yet the laws also reflected the hierarchies of Babylonian society. The same crime could bring different punishments depending on whether the victim was a noble, a commoner, or a slave. If a noble injured another noble, the penalty might be exact retaliation. But if a noble harmed a commoner, fines might be paid instead. These distinctions revealed the deep divisions of class that shaped daily life, even under the guiding hand of justice. Courtrooms were often held in temples or public spaces, where judges or panels of elders heard disputes. Witnesses were called, evidence was presented, and oaths were sworn before the gods. To lie under oath was not only dishonorable but dangerous, for it was believed the gods themselves would punish falsehood. Contracts and agreements were written on clay tablets, sealed with cylinder seals that bore unique designs. These tablets could be stored and produced as proof, giving weight and permanence to legal matters. For ordinary Babylonians, the law touched nearly every part of life. Farmers knew the rules of renting fields or sharing irrigation canals. Merchants relied on contracts to secure trade deals. Families used laws to settle inheritance, adoption, or marriage arrangements. Even wages for laborers were regulated, ensuring that workers received fair payment for their toil. The predictability of law gave people a sense of stability, an assurance that disputes would not be left to chance or personal power. Punishments varied, ranging from fines and restitution to corporal punishment or even death. If a builder constructed a house that collapsed and killed the owner, the builder could be executed. If his poor work caused the death of the owner's son, then the builder's son might be put to death. To us, this seems harsh and unjust, but to the Babylonians, it reflected the seriousness of responsibility. Work and duty were not casual. Lives depended on them, and the law held people accountable in ways that bound the community together. Despite its severity, the law was also protective. Hammurabi's code included measures for widows and orphans, ensuring they were not left destitute. It provided rules for adoption, giving childless couples the chance to raise heirs, and protecting children from abandonment. It regulated loans and debts, offering limits on what could be demanded from borrowers. These provisions reveal that Babylonian justice, though stern, also sought compassion, balancing the needs of the vulnerable against the power of the wealthy. Religion was always intertwined with law. Shamash, the god of justice, was believed to watch over judges and witnesses, ensuring truth prevailed. Oaths sworn in his name carried divine weight, and lawbreakers risked not only human punishment, but divine wrath. The king, too, was seen as chosen by the gods to uphold justice. Hammurabi himself declared that his laws were meant to cause justice to prevail in the land, to destroy the wicked and the evil, so that the strong might not oppress the weak. The presence of law gave Babylon a rhythm of trust. Merchants could trade knowing their contracts would be honored. Farmers could share canals, knowing disputes would be judged fairly. Families could arrange marriages or divide inheritance, knowing rules stood behind their agreements. Law was the invisible thread holding together the daily interactions of the city, from the humblest exchange of grain to the grandest festival in Marduk's temple. To imagine law in Babylon is to picture the solemn silence of a courtroom, a scribe scratching words into clay as witnesses speak. It is to see a merchant pressing his cylinder seal into wet clay, securing a contract for grain. It is to hear a judge remind disputing neighbors that the gods themselves demand truth and fairness. And it is to picture the stone stele standing tall in the city, its carved words a permanent reminder that order was sacred, binding both rich and poor. At night, when the city's noise faded and oil lamps flickered in homes, the laws remained like a steady heartbeat, unseen but constant. They were the unseen guardians of Babylon, shaping not only commerce and disputes, but the very way people understood their place in the world. For the Babylonians, law was not just rule, it was harmony, justice, and divine order made visible in clay and stone. Life in Babylon, like life everywhere in the ancient world, was fragile. Illness, injury, and the sudden arrival of fever or pain were part of daily existence. Yet the Babylonians, resourceful and deeply spiritual, developed ways to understand and treat these ailments. To them, health was never simply a matter of the body, it was also bound to the soul, the gods, and the unseen forces that moved through the world. Healing, therefore, was not only about herbs and remedies, but about prayers, rituals, and a constant negotiation with the divine. Babylonians believed that sickness often had supernatural causes. A fever might be seen as the work of a displeased god or the touch of a demon slipping unseen into the body. Nightmares could be explained as the intrusion of restless spirits. Even toothaches were sometimes thought to be caused by worms, small creatures imagined to gnaw inside the gums. Illness was not random. It carried meaning, a sign that something in the balance of life had shifted. Healers, therefore, came in many forms. There were physicians' men trained in practical remedies, who knew herbs, poultices, and bandaging. And there were exorcists, priestly healers who specialized in driving out spirits through incantations and rituals. Often, both worked together, for a patient might need medicine for the body and chants for the soul. In Babylon, science and religion were not separate. They were threads of the same fabric, woven into the art of healing. Clay tablets uncovered by archaeologists preserve recipes for remedies. For a cough, a healer might mix dates, honey, and herbs into a soothing syrup. For stomach pain, they could prepare infusions of mint or coriander. To treat wounds, they used oils to prevent infection and bandages made from linen or wool. Some remedies were surprisingly practical, revealing an understanding of plants and minerals that eased suffering in ways still familiar today. But alongside these practical treatments were rituals. A fevered patient might lie while a priest recited long incantations, calling on the gods to lift the illness away. Offerings were made bread, beer, or incense to appease angry spirits. Amulets in the shape of protective gods or animals were placed near the sickbed. These charms were believed to guard the patient, forming invisible walls against further harm. The gods of healing were central to this process. Gula, the goddess of health and medicine, was often invoked in prayers. Her temples sometimes housed dogs, animals considered sacred to her, believed to carry her healing power. To touch or feed these dogs was thought to bring protection. Ea, the god of wisdom and water, was also called upon, for his knowledge encompassed both the natural and the divine. For Babylonians, healing was never only human effort, it was always partnership with the gods. Dreams played a role as well. A healer might interpret a dream to understand the cause of an illness or the spirit responsible for it. If a patient dreamed of water, it might signal purification. If they dreamed of a lion, perhaps Ishtar had sent a warning. Dreams were seen as doorways between the human world and the divine, offering clues to both sickness and cure. Midwives were essential figures, guiding women through the dangers of childbirth. They used oils and herbs to ease pain, whispered prayers to protective goddesses, and ensured offerings were made for the safety of mother and child. Birth was both a joyous and perilous time, and the skills of midwives were treasured across the city. Some treatments were startling to modern eyes. Remedies might call for mixing crushed stones, animal fats, or even unusual ingredients like turtle shells or snake skins. These substances were combined not only for physical effects, but for symbolic power, connecting the patient to the forces of nature and the god's will. What mattered was not only whether the remedy soothed the body, but whether it restored harmony to the unseen world around it. Hospitals, as we know, did not exist, but temples sometimes functioned as centers of healing. Patients might sleep within temple courtyards, hoping for divine visions to guide their recovery. Priests interpreted these dreams, offered sacrifices, and performed rituals. Healing was communal as much as personal, supported by family, neighbors, and the larger framework of faith. Hygiene played its role too. Babylonians bathed in the river, washed hands and faces, and used oils to cleanse skin. These practices may have helped limit some illnesses, even if the connection between cleanliness and disease was not fully understood. To remain pure was not only practical but sacred, a way of honoring the gods and protecting oneself from impurity. The law also shaped healing. Hammurabi's code includes rules for physicians, setting payments for treatments, but also punishments for failure. If a doctor performed surgery that caused harm, severe penalties could follow, even the loss of a hand. These strict rules reflect how seriously Babylonians valued health, and how much responsibility rested on those who claimed the skill to heal. Despite all precautions, illness and death were never far away. Epidemics swept through cities, accidents struck in fields or workshops, and even minor infections could turn deadly. Yet in the face of this fragility, the Babylonians responded with resilience. They turned to their gods, their healers, and their traditions, seeking comfort and meaning. To care for the sick was not only duty, but devotion, an act of compassion that bound families and communities together. At night, when a patient lay resting under the glow of an oil lamp, surrounded by family murmuring prayers, one can imagine the quiet hope that filled Babylonian homes. The smell of herbs drifted from pots, charms hung from doorways, and a healer whispered words taught by generations before. Healing was not guaranteed, but care, faith, and effort created a sense of peace. In this way, health was never only about cure. It was about comfort, hope, and the belief that the gods had not abandoned their people. To picture health and healing in Babylon is to see both the practical and the mystical, the grinding of herbs in clay bowls, the soft murmur of incantations, the touch of a hand laying a bandage, the flicker of a lamp casting shadows on a patient's face. It is to see a civilization that, like our own, longed to ease suffering, to protect loved ones, and to find meaning in the mystery of illness. And in their efforts, part science, part faith, the Babylonians remind us that healing is as much about the heart as the body. In their remedies, their prayers, and their rituals, they sought not only to survive, but to live with dignity, strength, and trust in the divine order that shaped their world. Though Babylon was a place of work, trade, and worship, it was also a place of joy. Life was not only about survival or duty. It was also about the moments of laughter, music, games, and companionship that brought relief from daily burdens. To imagine entertainment in Babylon is to see families gathering on rooftops under the stars, friends sharing drinks in a tavern, musicians filling courtyards with melodies, and children laughing as they rolled hoops through dusty streets. Music was at the heart of Babylonian leisure. Lyres, harps, flutes, and drums provided the soundtrack of the city, their notes rising during festivals, feasts, and everyday gatherings. Musicians were highly respected, often trained from youth to master instruments and songs. In the temples, music honored the gods, with hymns sung in carefully structured tones. In taverns and homes, music was freer, a source of joy and relaxation. Songs told stories of love and loss, of gods and heroes, of daily struggles that everyone understood. To hear a harp's soft plucking or the steady beat of a drum was to feel both comfort and connection. Storytelling was another treasured form of entertainment. Before the glow of oil lamps, elders recited tales of kings and warriors, of gods who shaped the world, and of heroes who journeyed across the lands. The Epic of Gilgamesh, one of the world's oldest stories, would have been told in Babylon, its themes of friendship, courage, and the search for immortality resonating with listeners of all ages. Children listened wide-eyed, adults nodded knowingly, and all felt themselves part of a larger story that linked past and present. Games, too, filled Babylonian leisure hours. Archaeologists have uncovered game boards etched into stone and clay, evidence of the royal game of yore, a board game played with dice and tokens. This game, both strategic and playful, entertained nobles and commoners alike. Knucklebones, similar to dice, were tossed by children in simple games of chance. Hoops, balls, and toy wagons gave children endless amusement. Play was not frivolous. It was part of growing, of learning social bonds, and of bringing joy to the rhythm of daily life. For adults, taverns offered a different kind of leisure. Beer was the drink of choice, thick and nourishing, consumed from large jars with reed straws. Taverns were places of conversation, laughter, and sometimes music. Men and women alike could be found there, sharing news, playing games, or enjoying companionship. These spaces were more than drinking halls. They were social hubs where friendships were forged and stories exchanged. Feasting was another great joy. Families gathered in courtyards for meals larger than usual, sharing roasted meats, sweet cakes, and plenty of drink. During festivals, feasts became communal, with music, dancing, and games continuing late into the night. A feast was not only about food, but about togetherness, the pleasure of sharing abundance with loved ones, neighbors, and sometimes strangers. Dancing accompanied many of these gatherings. Groups moved in circles, their steps guided by drums and clapping, while singers chanted verses. Dances were often linked to religious rituals, but they also flourished in private celebrations. The sight of dancers under torchlight, their shadows flickering across walls, must have been mesmerizing, turning ordinary nights into moments of beauty and rhythm. Even quiet pastimes found their place in Babylon. People carved small figurines, shaped clay toys, or decorated pottery. Women embroidered cloth or strung beads into jewelry, their hands busy while conversations flowed. Men sometimes carved seals or sharpened tools, finding satisfaction in skillful work that blended labor with leisure. These small, personal acts of creation offered calm and fulfillment. Sports and physical activities were part of life as well. Wrestling and boxing provided both exercise and entertainment, often held in open spaces where crowds gathered to watch. Hunters, especially nobles, sought game beyond the city walls, turning the pursuit of animals into both necessity and sport. These activities tested strength, courage, and skill, admired qualities in Babylonian society. Astronomy, too, held a place in leisure. The Babylonians were among the first to chart the movements of stars and planets, and evenings often brought families to rooftops where the sky stretched endlessly above. Fathers pointed out constellations to children, priests studied the heavens for omens, and ordinary people simply marveled at the patterns above them. Under the stars, the worries of the day seemed smaller, and the connection to the divine felt closer. Leisure in Babylon also reflected social status. The wealthy enjoyed elaborate feasts, private musicians, and beautifully made game boards inlaid with precious stones. They commissioned entertainers and surrounded themselves with luxury. The poor, while more limited, still found joy in music, games, festivals, and the simple pleasures of food and drink. Leisure was not only about wealth, it was about community, creativity, and tradition. Public festivals amplified all of these pleasures. During the Akichu and other celebrations, music, dance, feasting, and games filled the city. Even those who had little joined in, swept up in the shared joy of honoring the gods and celebrating life. In these moments, Babylon was not divided by class, but united in spirit, a city alive with sound, color, and laughter. To picture entertainment in Babylon is to see both grandeur and simplicity. It is to imagine nobles reclining at feasts, while musicians play gentle tunes. It is to see children laughing as they chase hoops through alleyways. It is to hear storytellers reciting ancient myths by lamplight, their voices weaving threads of memory across generations. It is to stand in a tavern, jar of beer in hand, while neighbors laugh and argue over the rules of the game. Entertainment was not a luxury in Babylon, it was a necessity. It gave people joy, strengthened bonds, and offered relief from the weight of labor and the uncertainty of life. It reminded them that though the gods demanded devotion and the laws demanded order, there was still space for laughter, music, and celebration. And so, Babylon was not only a city of walls and temples, of laws and markets. It was also a city of songs carried on the wind, of footsteps tapping in rhythm, of stories told again and again. It was a city where leisure wove itself into daily life, making the hardships easier to bear and the joys brighter to share. Though Babylon was famed for its soaring ziggurats, brilliant gates, and bustling streets, the city could not have existed without the silent labor of fields stretching beyond its walls. Agriculture was the true foundation of Babylonian life. The markets, temples, and households all depended on the steady supply of grain, fruits, vegetables, and livestock produced by countless farmers. To imagine agriculture in Babylon is to step into a world where rivers shaped destiny, where the turning of the seasons was measured in sowing and harvest, and where every family's survival was tied to the fertility of the land. The heart of this system was the Euphrates River. Flowing wide and strong, it carried both life and danger. Its waters nourished crops through an elaborate system of irrigation canals, ditches, and reservoirs. These channels, carefully dug and maintained, transformed dry soil into fertile farmland. Without them, Babylon could not have survived. Farmers worked constantly to clear silt, repair walls, and manage the flow of water. A single flood could ruin fields, while drought could bring hunger. The rivers were both friend and foe, revered as divine powers to be honored with offerings and prayers. Barley was the most important crop. It was hardy, versatile, and could be used to make bread, porridge, and the thick beer that Babylonians drank daily. Wheat was grown as well, though it was more delicate and valued as a luxury. Dates from the tall, graceful palms lining the rivers were another essential food. These fruits were eaten fresh, dried, or turned into syrup, sweetening meals and providing quick energy. Together, barley, wheat, and dates formed the backbone of the Babylonian diet. Vegetables and legumes added variety and nutrition. Onions, garlic, cucumbers, lentils, and chickpeas grew in the irrigated soil, forming the base of stews and soups. Herbs like coriander, cumin, and mustard flavored meals, while sesame seeds provided oil for cooking. Flax was grown for linen, a fine cloth valued for clothing and trade. Fields also held orchards of figs, pomegranates, and apples, though these were more rare and often reserved for the wealthy. Livestock contributed just as much as crops. Sheep provided wool for clothing, goats gave milk and meat, and cattle pulled plows across fields. Donkeys carried goods into the city, while chickens, ducks, and geese supplied eggs and meat. Fishermen cast nets into the Euphrates, pulling in fish that became a common food for both rich and poor. In every corner of Babylon, animals were essential companions in the work of survival. Farming was seasonal, tied to the rhythms of the rivers and the sun. In spring, fields were sown, the ground prepared by wooden plows drawn by oxen. Summer brought the challenge of heat and the careful management of irrigation channels. By autumn, crops were harvested, stored in clay jars and granaries, and measured out carefully to last through the year. Winter offered rest from the fields, though farmers still tended animals and repaired tools. Each season carried its duties, repeated year after year like a sacred cycle. The work was demanding. Farmers rose before dawn, guiding animals, digging ditches, and watching the skies for signs of weather. Women helped with sowing, harvesting, and food preparation, while children carried water, gathered firewood, or tended small animals. Entire families worked together, for the survival of the household depended on shared labor. Farming was not only an occupation, it was a way of life, passed down through generations, with knowledge and skills taught from parent to child. Storage was as important as harvest. Grain was measured, weighed, and sealed in jars, or placed in communal granaries, overseen by temple or palace officials. This ensured that supplies were available during lean years or times of crisis. Surplus grain could be traded in the markets, exchanged for tools, clothing, or luxury goods. In this way, the harvest not only fed Babylon, but fueled its economy, linking farmers to merchants, scribes, and priests. The temples played a central role in agriculture. As large landowners, they controlled vast tracts of farmland, employing laborers and overseeing irrigation. Offerings of grain, animals, and fruits were brought to temples to honor the gods, reinforcing the belief that harvests were blessings from divine hands. Festivals celebrated the sowing and reaping of crops, thanking deities like Marduk, Ishtar, and Shamash for fertility and abundance. To neglect offerings was to risk drought or disaster. The state also regulated farming. Laws governed the use of irrigation canals, ensuring that neighbors shared water fairly. Hammurabi's code set rules for renting land, dividing harvests, and settling disputes. If a farmer failed to maintain a canal and it flooded another's field, he could be held responsible for the damage. These laws reflected the interdependence of farmers each family. Work affected not only their own survival, but that of their neighbors and the city as a whole. Trade connected Babylon's agriculture to the wider world. Surplus grain was exchanged for metals, wood, and luxury goods not available locally. Dates and wool traveled along caravan routes, while in return Babylon received copper, tin, and precious stones. In this way, the quiet labor of farmers reached far beyond their fields, sustaining not only Babylon, but entire trade networks that stretched across Mesopotamia. For all its abundance, agriculture was fragile. A poor harvest could bring hunger, forcing families to sell land, borrow grain, or even enter servitude to survive. Floods could sweep away entire fields. Droughts could leave soil cracked and barren. Farmers lived close to the edge of survival, their fortunes tied to forces beyond their control. Yet they persevered, season after season, guided by tradition, community, and faith in the gods. To imagine agriculture in Babylon is to picture fields stretching green along the riverbanks. Farmers bent over rows of barley, children carrying bundles of reeds, and flocks of sheep grazing under the sun. It is to see water flowing through carefully dug canals, sparkling as it nourishes the soil. It is to hear the lowing of oxen, the chatter of workers in the fields, and the rustle of grain in the breeze. At night, after long days in the fields, families sat together to share simple meals, bread baked from their own grain, vegetables from their gardens, milk or cheese from their goats. They spoke of the day's work, of hopes for the next harvest, of prayers to the gods who held their faiths. Their labor, though humble, sustained the greatest city of its time. Without them, the ziggurats would crumble, the markets would empty, and the temples would fall silent. Agriculture was not only the backbone of Babylon, it was its lifeblood. It connected every household to the land, every family to the gods, and every season to the cycle of survival and renewal. In the rhythm of sowing and reaping, in the steady flow of the rivers, the Babylonians found both sustenance and meaning. When we picture Babylon, it is often in fragments of legend. The towering ziggurat said to brush the sky, the magnificent Ishtar Gate with its shining blue bricks, and the fabled hanging gardens that stirred imaginations for centuries. Yet beyond these wonders, Babylon was a city of careful design. Its streets, walls, and buildings planned to support not only grandeur, but the daily lives of its people. To walk through its gates was to enter a world where architecture was both practical and symbolic, where every stone and brick carried meaning. The lifeblood of Babylon's architecture was the mud brick. Clay dug from riverbanks was mixed with water and straw, then shaped into bricks and dried in the sun. These bricks built houses, workshops, palaces, and even temples. Though fragile compared to stone, mud bricks were plentiful and practical, easy to make and replace. Wealthier projects sometimes used kiln-fired bricks, stronger and more durable. And in the grandest structures these were glazed with vivid colors, transforming simple clay into works of art. The city was famously enclosed by great walls, designed both for defense and as a symbol of might. Ancient accounts speak of double and even triple walls, massive structures wide enough for chariots to ride along the top. Within these fortifications, the city spread in organized patterns. Streets, some narrow and winding, others broad and straight, divided neighborhoods. Courtyards broke up the density of houses, providing open spaces where families cooked, worked, and gathered. At the heart of the city stood the temple complexes, most notably the ziggurat dedicated to Marduk, Babylon's chief god. These monumental towers were built in stepped levels, each smaller than the one below, creating a stairway-like ascent. The ziggurat was more than architecture. It was theology in brick. Rising toward the heavens, it represented the link between earth and sky, between mortals and the divine. Pilgrims and priests ascended its terraces, carrying offerings, chanting hymns, and reminding all that the gods dwelt both above and among them. Equally striking was the Ishtar Gate, part of the city's ceremonial entrance. Constructed of glazed bricks in brilliant shades of blue, the gate was adorned with reliefs of lions, dragons, and bulls, symbols of strength and divine protection. Passing through it was not merely entering the city, it was walking through a sacred threshold, a reminder that Babylon itself was a place blessed and guarded by the gods. The processional way, a grand street lined with decorated walls, stretched from the gate toward the temple, used during festivals when statues of gods were paraded before the people. Homes, though less monumental, were carefully planned. Most followed a similar layout, a central courtyard surrounded by rooms, with small windows high in the walls to let in air but preserve privacy. Roofs were flat, used for sleeping on hot nights or for storing goods. Narrow alleys wove between these homes, creating neighborhoods where families lived closely together. The poor occupied smaller, single-room houses, while the wealthy expanded their homes with multiple courtyards, upper floors, and decorated walls. Palaces displayed the pinnacle of Babylonian architecture. Built for kings, these vast complexes included audience halls, private chambers, gardens, and storerooms. Walls were adorned with colorful tiles, carved reliefs, and symbols of power. The king's palace was not only his residence, but a seat of government, a place where scribes, officials, and guards maintained the machinery of the state. Within its walls, decisions were made that shaped the lives of every Babylonian. The city's layout reflected both practicality and symbolism. Streets connected markets, temples, and palaces, ensuring the trade and worship flowed smoothly. Canals ran through and around the city, bringing water to households and crops. Bridges spanned these waterways, while quays allowed boats to unload goods directly into the city. Babylon was not only a place to live, but a hub of movement, designed for efficiency as much as for grandeur. Perhaps the most enchanting element of Babylonian architectural lore is the story of the Hanging Gardens. Ancient writers described them as terraced gardens filled with trees, flowers, and flowing water, rising like a green mountain within the city. Whether they truly existed in Babylon or were built elsewhere remains debated, but the image endures. Shaded terraces where vines hung and water cascaded, a man-made paradise in the heart of the desert. Real or imagined, the story of the gardens reflects Babylon's love of blending architecture with nature, of creating beauty even in a harsh environment. Infrastructure supported daily life as much as monumental beauty. Drainage channels carried waste away from streets, reducing disease. Wells and canals supplied water for homes and workshops. Markets were placed strategically near gates and thoroughfares, ensuring easy access for farmers and merchants. Even taverns and bathhouses were integrated into neighborhoods, showing how city planning considered both necessity and leisure. Architecture also expressed values. Temples rose high because the gods were supreme. Palaces sprawled wide because kings embodied authority. City walls stood thick and tall because protection and pride were essential. Even humble homes, arranged around courtyards, reflected the importance of family and community. To live in Babylon was to live within a landscape where buildings were not just structures, but reflections of belief and identity. The constant rebuilding of the city also told its story. Mud brick crumbled with time, and structures required repair or renewal. Streets were repaved, walls rebuilt, and temples expanded. Babylon was never static. It was always a living city, shaped by the labor of builders and craftsmen. Each generation added its layer, so that the city was both ancient and new, a palimpsest of human effort across centuries. To picture architecture and planning in Babylon is to walk slowly through its streets. The cool shadow of tall walls offers relief from the sun. The glazed brilliance of the Ishtar Gate dazzles the eyes, its lions seeming almost alive. Courtyards echo with the sound of children playing, while the processional way resounds with music during festivals. From rooftops, one sees the orderly spread of streets and canals, and above them all, the ziggurat rising like a stairway to heaven. Babylon's architecture was not just about shelter or beauty. It was about meaning, about connecting heaven and earth, order and chaos, people and gods. Every brick, from the humblest house to the grandest temple, carried within it the hopes and beliefs of those who built it. And in their careful planning, the Babylonians created not only a city, but a symbol, a place remembered for millennia as one of the wonders of the world. Babylon was more than a city of walls, temples, and markets. It was a crossroads of the ancient world. Nestled along the great Euphrates River, it stood at the meeting point of trade routes that stretched across Mesopotamia and beyond. To walk through its gates was to see not only Babylonians, but traders from distant lands, their carts piled high with goods, their accents carrying the sound of faraway places. Trade and travel brought wealth, diversity, and knowledge into Babylon, making it not only a center of power, but a center of connection. The Euphrates River was the first and greatest highway of Babylon. Its broad waters carried boats laden with grain, dates, fish, and timber. Merchants loaded reed boats and wooden barges with goods, guiding them along currents toward the city's quays. There, porters carried jars of oil, baskets of fruit, and bundles of textiles into the bustling markets. The river made Babylon open to lands both near and far, linking it to towns upstream and to the Persian Gulf downstream. Along its banks, boatmen shouted directions, fishermen mended nets, and merchants counted goods, all part of the ceaseless rhythm of trade. Caravans brought another lifeline to the city. Donkeys and camels, laden with heavy packs, trudged across dusty roads, carrying goods from far-flung regions. From the east came precious stones like lapis lazuli and carnelian, shining blue and red in the sunlight. From the north came metals, tin, and copper vital for making bronze. From the west arrived cedar wood, tall and fragrant, prized for building and shipmaking. Spices, perfumes, ivory, and rare textiles traveled along these routes, each object a small piece of another world brought into Babylon. Within the city, the marketplace reflected this diversity. Alongside barley and onions grown nearby, one could find incense from Arabia, wine from distant vineyards, and fine cloth dyed with colors that glowed in the sun. A Babylonian might run fingers across a fabric woven in Anatolia, or admire beads carved in lands they had never seen. To shop in the market was to experience the richness of a world much larger than the city itself. Trade was carefully managed. Scribes recorded transactions on clay tablets, noting weights, prices, and nets. Standard measures were enforced, with carved stones and metal weights used to ensure fairness. Merchants carried cylinder seals, rolling their distinctive designs into wet clay to sign contracts. Hammurabi's code included many laws about trade, protecting buyers from fraud and ensuring that merchants delivered what they promised. In this way, Babylon's reputation for justice extended into the marketplace, giving traders confidence that their dealings would be respected. Travel itself was an adventure. Roads connected Babylon to other great cities of Mesopotamia, such as Ur, Nippur, and Nineveh. These routes were dusty and long, sometimes dangerous, passing through deserts or marshlands where bandits could strike. Caravans traveled together for safety, their lines stretching across the horizon, carrying not only goods but news, stories, and ideas. Travelers rested at way stations, small inns or encampments where food and water were available. At night, fires flickered in the darkness, and strangers shared tales in many tongues, their voices mingling with the sound of animals shifting in the sand. Within the city, taverns were gathering spots for merchants and travelers alike. Over bowls of beer, deals were struck, friendships made, and gossip shared. A merchant from Babylon might sit beside a trader from the Levant, exchanging news of distant wars or new opportunities. These encounters broadened horizons, reminding citizens that their city was part of a vast web of human connection. Religion, too, was tied to trade and travel. Merchants often prayed to Nabu, the god of wisdom, or to Shamash, the sun god who oversaw truth and fairness. Small offerings were made before journeys, asking for safe passage and honest dealings. Temples sometimes played roles in financing trade, lending grain or silver to merchants who would repay their debts after a successful trip. In this way, commerce and faith were bound tightly together. The movement of goods also meant the movement of culture. Foreign traders brought not only wares, but songs, customs, and stories. Babylon absorbed these influences, blending them into its own rich tapestry. New words entered its language, new fashions appeared in its clothing, and new ideas shaped its science and art. Travel and trade were not only about material wealth, they expanded the imagination, making Babylon a city of diversity and exchange. For ordinary Babylonians, trade brought both opportunity and challenge. It filled markets with abundance, but it also exposed the city to price changes, shortages, or disputes. A bad harvest in one region could ripple across trade networks, raising costs in Babylon. Laws and contracts helped manage these risks, but the uncertainty of trade was ever present. Yet despite these challenges, the city thrived, its economy growing stronger with each caravan and boat that arrived at its gates. The grandeur of Babylon itself reflected the wealth brought by trade. Glazed bricks, precious stones, fine woods, and luxury goods filled palaces and temples. Kings used this wealth to build monuments, sponsor festivals, and display power. Ordinary citizens, too, benefited, enjoying greater variety in food, clothing, and tools than would have been possible without far-reaching connections. To picture trade and travel in Babylon is to imagine movement and variety. Boats drifting along the Euphrates, their sails catching the wind. Caravans winding slowly across plains, bells jingling from donkeys' necks. Markets crowded with goods from every direction, voices bargaining in many languages. It is to see scribes pressing styluses into clay, sealing contracts with care. It is to feel the excitement of a traveler entering the city after weeks on the road, marveling at the sight of towering walls and bustling streets. At night, when the markets quieted and caravans rested outside the gates, the impact of trade lingered. Families sat at meals flavored with spices from distant lands. Women wore beads of foreign stone. Priests burned incense brought from faraway deserts. In these small ways, the world beyond Babylon entered its homes, reminding its people that they were part of something vast and interconnected. Trade and travel were the threads that wove Babylon into the larger fabric of the ancient world. They carried goods, ideas, and stories across deserts, rivers, and seas, making the city not only a center of Mesopotamia, but a beacon of culture and exchange. In every jar of oil, every bolt of cloth, every story told by a weary traveler, Babylon touched the world, and the world touched Babylon. In the great city of Babylon, daily life was shaped not only by kings, priests, and scribes, but also by the countless women who sustained families, managed households, and contributed to the economy and culture of the city. Though ancient societies often placed men in positions of public authority, Babylonian women held important roles of their own. Their influence was felt in kitchens and marketplaces, in temples and taverns, in homes both humble and grand. To understand Babylon fully, one must walk quietly into the world of its women, where duty, resilience, and sometimes independence defined their lives. The household was the center of a woman's responsibilities. Women oversaw food preparation, spinning, weaving, and the care of children. Bread baking, beer brewing, and textile production were central tasks, ensuring that families had nourishment and clothing. These activities, though often hidden within courtyards and kitchens, were essential to the survival of the city. A woman's skill in managing her home was valued highly, for it reflected not only her competence, but the honor of her family. Yet Babylonian women were not confined solely to domestic life. Many participated directly in the economy. Women brewed beer and sold it in taverns, places that bustled with conversation and trade. Some ran shops, managing transactions and bargaining with customers in the marketplace. Others worked as midwives or healers, providing care during births or illnesses. Records also show women renting land, engaging in trade contracts, and even lending money. These examples remind us that Babylon, though patriarchal, offered women more economic agency than is often assumed. Marriage was a central event in a woman's life, but it was also bound by law and custom. Marriages were usually arranged, formalized through contracts written on clay tablets. These agreements detailed dowries, inheritance rights, and obligations between husband and wife. Women brought dowries of goods, land, or silver, and in return, they gained security within their husband's household. Laws protected women to some degree. If a husband neglected his wife or failed to provide, she could seek divorce. Widows retained rights to property, ensuring they were not left destitute. Motherhood was both joy and duty. Bearing children ensured the continuation of families, and children were seen as blessings from the gods. Women cared for infants with tenderness, protecting them with amulets and prayers. They taught daughters the skills of the household and guided sons until they entered apprenticeships or schools. The rhythms of childrearing were demanding but deeply meaningful, binding women to the cycles of family and tradition. Religion offered another sphere where women played vital roles. Some became priestesses, serving in temples dedicated to deities like Ishtar, the goddess of love and war, or Gula, the goddess of healing. Priestesses performed rituals, managed temple property, and sometimes held significant influence. Certain priestesses, known as Nadru, lived in temple precincts, dedicating their lives to service. Though their paths differed from those of wives and mothers, they too embodied the strength and devotion expected of Babylonian women. Women also appeared in legal documents as witnesses, business partners, and property owners. Hammurabi's Code, though written by and for a patriarchal society, acknowledged women's rights in areas like inheritance, dowries, and divorce. If a woman's husband died, she often inherited property to support herself and her children. If a husband mistreated his wife, she could return to her family with her dowry intact. Though not equal to men in all respects, Babylonian women were not invisible. They were recognized participants in the legal and economic framework of the city. Some women achieved positions of remarkable independence. Records mention wealthy women who managed estates, hired laborers, and engaged in large-scale trade. Others became scribes, though this was rare. Even queens and royal women influenced politics, acting as advisors, diplomats, or patrons of temples. Their names, preserved in inscriptions, remind us that Babylon's history was not only written by men, yet challenges were real. Women were vulnerable to the dangers of childbirth, illness, and the demands of labor. Social expectations placed heavy burdens on them, and their freedoms varied depending on class and circumstance. A noble woman might manage estates and command servants, while a poor woman labored long hours in fields, workshops, or taverns. Slavery added another layer. Enslaved women lived under the authority of masters. Their choices limited, their lives often harsh. Despite these difficulties, women found ways to shape their lives. They created beauty in textiles and jewelry, comfort in food and home, and meaning in rituals and prayers. They raised children with care, guided families with wisdom, and participated in the shared joys of festivals, music, and community. Their voices may not be as loud in the surviving records, but their presence was constant, their influence undeniable. To picture women in Babylon is to imagine many scenes. A mother teaching her daughter to spin wool in a quiet courtyard. A brewer pouring thick beer into jars for customers in a lively tavern. A priestess lighting incense in the dim glow of a temple, her chants rising with the smoke. A merchant's wife weighing silver in the market, bargaining confidently with a trader from afar. Each moment reflects resilience, skill, and the quiet strength that sustained the city. At night, women sat with their families, sharing meals, telling stories, and preparing for the next day's labors. They watched the stars from rooftops, whispered prayers to protective spirits, and soothed children to sleep with lullabies. In these moments, their roles were not only practical, but deeply human, full of tenderness and continuity. The role of women in Babylon was not uniform or simple. It was layered: domestic and economic, spiritual and legal, humble and powerful. Women were wives, mothers, priestesses, merchants, healers, servants, and sometimes leaders. Their lives remind us that the story of Babylon was not only written in laws and temples, but also in kitchens and courtyards, in lullabies and marketplaces. And in their daily labor, devotion, and love, Babylonian women carried the weight of their families and the strength of their city. They may not have stood atop the ziggurat or carved their names into monuments, but without them, the city could not have endured. Babylon was a city of trade and temples, of music and markets, but it was also a city that lived with the constant shadow of war. In the ancient world, no great city could afford to ignore the threat of invasion. Armies marched across Mesopotamia as often as the rivers flooded, and kingdoms rose and fell in cycles of conquest. To survive, Babylon needed not only farmers and scribes, but also soldiers, walls, and strategies of defense. The story of daily life in Babylon, therefore, was also a story of preparation, vigilance, and resilience in the face of conflict. The first line of defense was the city wall, a marvel of engineering and determination. Ancient accounts describe Babylon's walls as massive, so wide that chariots could ride side by side along their tops. Whether or not these descriptions exaggerated their size, the walls were formidable, built of mud brick reinforced with bitumen and stone. They encircled the city like an immense shield, punctuated by towers and fortified gates. At the most famous of these gates, the brilliant Ishtar Gate, with its glazed blue bricks decorated with lions and dragon soldiers, stood guard, ready to control who entered and left the city. Within these walls, guards and soldiers formed Babylon's standing defense. Some were professionals, trained and maintained by the state, while others were conscripted during times of war. Soldiers trained with bows, spears, shields, and swords, their equipment shaped by the resources of Mesopotamia. Bronze helmets and leather armor provided protection, while large rectangular shields formed barriers in battle. Archery was especially important. Ranks of archers could rain arrows upon advancing enemies, a deadly curtain of defense. War in Babylon was not fought only at the gates. Kings led campaigns beyond the city, seeking to expand territory, secure trade routes, or punish rivals. Soldiers marched in columns across plains and deserts, carrying supplies on pack animals, their banners fluttering in the wind. War meant long journeys, harsh conditions, and the constant threat of ambush. Yet it also meant opportunity for soldiers to earn rewards, for kings to display power, and for the city to claim dominance. The king himself was central to Babylon's defense. As the chosen representative of the gods, he was expected to protect his people, both spiritually and militarily. Kings often portrayed themselves as mighty warriors, their inscriptions boasting of victories, conquests, and enemies defeated. In ceremonies, they presented themselves not only as rulers, but as guardians, chosen by Marduk or Ishtar to keep the city safe. War, in their hands, was as much about divine legitimacy as it was about territory. Inside the city, preparations for defense touched everyone. Farmers were sometimes called to provide supplies for the army grain, beer, and livestock to sustain soldiers. Craftsmen forged weapons, repaired armor, and built siege equipment. Families worried as sons marched to war, praying for their safe return. When threats loomed, ordinary citizens might be conscripted to help repair walls, dig moats, or carry supplies. War was never the business of soldiers alone. It involved the entire fabric of society. Siege warfare was one of the greatest fears of any Babylonian city. Enemies could surround the walls, cutting off supplies and waiting for hunger to weaken defenders. Towers, battering rams, and ladders were used to breach defenses. For this reason, Babylon's walls were built not only high but thick, with gates reinforced by bronze. Supplies were stored within, ensuring that the city could withstand long sieges. Water from the Euphrates, which flowed through the city, was a blessing both for drinking and for resisting attempts to starve the city into submission. The gods, too, were called upon for defense. Before battles, priests performed rituals, seeking omens in the stars, in animal livers, or in dreams. If the gods favored Babylon, victory was assured. If not, caution was needed. Soldiers marched with prayers to Shamash, god of justice and truth, or to Ishtar, fierce goddess of war. Statues of gods were sometimes carried into battle, believed to lend divine power to the army. To fight was not only a human act, it was participation in the cosmic struggle between order and chaos. Yet war was not only distant, it sometimes reached the very streets of Babylon. History records times when invaders breached the city, when foreign armies toppled its kings or carried away its treasures. The capture of Babylon by Cyrus of Persia, for example, was remembered for its swiftness and order. But earlier conquests were more brutal, leaving destruction and sorrow. In such moments, families huddled in their homes, uncertain of the future, praying for protection. War brought not only glory, but fear, dislocation, and loss. Still, life went on even in times of conflict. Markets reopened, fields were sown, and families rebuilt. The resilience of the people was as much a defense as the walls themselves. They endured the cycles of war and peace, adapting to new rulers, continuing traditions, and preserving their identity through devotion, work, and community. For the ordinary soldier, war was a mixture of duty and hardship. He might march for days under the hot sun, eat rations of bread and dried dates, and sleep on the ground beneath the stars. In battle, he faced danger not only from enemy weapons, but from hunger, thirst, and disease. Yet his service tied him to the city, giving him honor, pay, and perhaps a small share of plunder. To serve in the army was to be part of Babylon's strength, a role both demanding and respected. To imagine war and defense in Babylon is to picture contrasts: the dazzling beauty of the Ishtar Gate and the grim faces of soldiers guarding it. the sound of lyres in peaceful taverns, and the clash of weapons on distant fields, the steady work of farmers, and the sudden disruption of conscription. It is to see a city both fragile and strong, both threatened and enduring. At night, when the gates were closed and guards walked the walls, Babylon lay under the watch of both soldiers and gods. Families slept knowing that beyond their homes, men stood ready with bows and spears, while priests whispered prayers to Marduk for protection. In the stillness, the city's defenses were both human and divine, a reminder that survival required vigilance, faith, and unity. War and defense shaped Babylon not only in battles fought, but in the resilience it fostered. It was a city that rose and fell, was conquered and rebuilt, yet endured in memory as one of the greatest of the ancient world. Its walls, soldiers, and kings were symbols of power, but its true strength lay in the determination of its people to survive, rebuild, and carry their traditions forward, no matter the storms of war. As the sun sank below the horizon, and its golden light faded from the walls of Babylon, the city shifted into a different rhythm. The clamor of the marketplace quieted, the clatter of carts slowed, and the heat of the day gave way to the cooler embrace of evening. Night in Babylon was not silent far from it, but it was gentler, slower, filled with different sounds and softer moods. To walk the streets after dark was to see a city transformed, resting yet alive in its own quiet way. Families gathered in their courtyards as the day came to an end. Clay ovens glowed with their last embers, roasting fish, baking bread, or simmering pots of lentil stew. The air filled with the mingled aromas of onions, garlic, and herbs. Children, still energetic, chased each other through alleys or played games with knucklebones, their laughter echoing against mud brick walls. Parents called them back as meals were served, and families sat together, sharing bread, dates, and thick beer. These evening meals were moments of unity, a pause after the labors of the day. As darkness deepened, oil lamps flickered to life. Made of clay and filled with sesame oil, their flames cast gentle circles of light, shadows dancing across walls and courtyards. The glow of these lamps softened the edges of the city, creating an atmosphere of calm. Storytelling often began at this time, as elders shared tales of gods, heroes, and distant lands. Children listened with wide eyes, while adults nodded at familiar lessons woven into the myths. In these stories, the wisdom of generations was passed down, binding families together across time. The rooftops became especially important at night. Flat and open, they were perfect for catching the cool evening breezes. Families spread mats and blankets there, lying back to watch the stars. The Babylonian sky, unclouded by modern lights, was a vast canvas of constellations. Priests studied the heavens carefully, charting the paths of planets and noting omens. But for ordinary people, the stars offered comfort and wonder. Parents pointed out familiar shapes to children, while lovers whispered beneath the constellations, dreaming of futures as vast as the sky itself. Religious rituals also marked the evening hours. Household shrines were tended, with small offerings of bread or beer left for protective spirits. Families prayed for safety through the night, asking the gods to guard against illness, misfortune, or spirits that might wander in the dark. Priests in temples continued their duties, chanting hymns, tending sacred fires, and watching the heavens for signs. The city may have rested, but the gods were never left unattended. For those who sought company, taverns remained lively after dusk. The thick beer of Babylon flowed into clay bowls, music played from flutes and drums, and conversations stretched long into the night. Merchants discussed deals, neighbors shared gossip, and travelers told tales from far-off lands. Laughter spilled into the streets, reminding all that Babylon was a city of joy as well as duty. These gatherings were more than leisure. They were part of the fabric of community, where bonds were strengthened and news spread from one household to another. The city streets themselves changed character at night. During the day, they were crowded with carts, animals, and shouting merchants. At night, they grew quieter, though never empty. Torches flickered near gates, guards paced along walls, and the occasional cart creaked by, carrying goods late into the markets. Dogs roamed, scavenging scraps left behind, their barking echoing through the alleys. The air grew cooler, carrying the scent of the river and the faint smoke of evening fires. Night in Babylon was also a time for intimacy. Couples found moments of quiet together on rooftops or in shaded courtyards. Parents soothed children to sleep with gentle songs, lullabies passed down from ancestors. These melodies, soft and rhythmic, carried comfort, promising that even in a world filled with uncertainty, love and care endured. Sleep itself was considered precious, a chance to restore strength and perhaps receive dreams that carried messages from the gods. Yet night was not without its dangers. Shadows concealed thieves, and the poor sometimes feared attack or misfortune. Spirits, too, were believed to wander after dark, capable of bringing illness or bad luck. To guard against them, amulets were placed near doors, and protective figures were buried beneath thresholds. These rituals, both simple and profound, gave families peace of mind as they closed their homes for the night. Beyond the courtyards and rooftops, the larger city carried on. Soldiers stood watch at the gates, their torches lighting the stone pathways. Priests in towering temples recited their chants, ensuring that cosmic order was preserved. Fishermen, rising earlier than most, already prepared their nets for the morning catch, their reed boats swaying gently in the moonlight. The city never fully slept. It simply shifted into a different rhythm, one quieter, but still alive. For travelers arriving late, the sight of Babylon at night was unforgettable. The walls loomed tall, torches burning at their tops. The Ishtar Gate glowed faintly in the torchlight, its glazed bricks catching and reflecting the fire's glow. Inside, the processional way stretched into the city, now hushed and empty, a silent contrast to the daytime bustle. To step into Babylon after dark was to feel awe, as if one had entered a place that belonged both to the living and to the gods. To imagine nightfall in Babylon is to imagine stillness layered with life. It is to see children curled beside their parents on rooftops, drifting into dreams under starlight. It is to hear the low murmur of voices in taverns, the distant beat of a drum, and the gentle lap of the Euphrates against its banks. It is to smell incense rising from temple courtyards, mingling with the earthy scent of clay and the faint perfume of flowers blooming in the night air. Babylon by night was a city of contrasts, quiet yet alive, restful yet watchful, ordinary yet touched by the sacred. It was a time when families turned inward, when communities gathered in joy, and when the city itself seemed to breathe more slowly, preparing for another dawn. And so, as the stars wheeled overhead and the moon traced its path across the sky, Babylon settled into its nightly rhythm. In courtyards and rooftops, in temples and taverns, in streets both humble and grand, the people of the city lived out their evenings in ways both familiar and timeless. Their night was not so different from ours, a time of rest, reflection, and dreams beneath the eternal sky. And so, we come to the end of our long journey through the streets, markets, homes, and temples of ancient Babylon. We have walked with its farmers and merchants, listened to its priests and storytellers, and watched the city shift from dawn to nightfall. What emerges is not only a picture of a great civilization, but of ordinary lives, families sharing meals, children learning to write, women weaving cloth, soldiers guarding gates, and neighbors gathering in courtyards. Though thousands of years have passed, so much feels familiar. The rhythms of work and rest, the joy of music, the warmth of family, and the comfort of rituals, all of these connect us to those who lived in Babylon. Their world was shaped by mud brick walls, flowing rivers, and towering ziggurats, yet their hearts held the same longings for safety, love, and meaning that we hold today. As you drift toward sleep, imagine the quiet of Babylon under the stars. Picture the glow of oil lamps in courtyards, the hush of voices in temples, and the gentle sound of the Euphrates flowing through the night. The city, like all of us, rested, preparing to rise again with the dawn. Thank you for spending this time exploring the daily life of ancient Babylon with me. If you enjoyed this journey, please remember to subscribe to the channel so you'll never miss our next story. And I'd love to know what you think. Leave a comment sharing what time of day you like to listen, or which parts of Babylonian life fascinated you most. Until next time, may your night be peaceful, your dreams gentle, and your rest as steady as the flow of the great river that once sustained Babylon.